things I struggle most with as a parent is trying to strike the balance between teaching my son to think better, the things I talk about in these videos, to question, to try and understand the logic and the math and the why behind what he does and how he thinks and what other people do, and to never be too certain, right? All those things. And discipline, and I would even use the word compliance, right? It's a hard word for me to say because it's so at odds with the first piece, the questioning and the never having certainty and always understanding why. Compliance, it assumes you just do what you're told, right? You just do it. It doesn't matter if you believe in it, if you don't. It doesn't matter if you think it makes sense. You just do it because that's the rule and you have to. That is so at odds with that it makes me uncomfortable to even say the word, but there's truth to it, right? I've matured, hopefully, in my thinking enough to be able to acknowledge that there is a truth to it. Part of what I'm trying to teach my son is compliance in certain ways. If there's certain social norms, if there's certain rules at his school or at whatever setting or environment we're in, if we're in a restaurant, there are certain times where it's just, hey, you need to do what I say right now. And I don't want to hear any questioning. I need you to not talk back to me, if we're in church, I'm making it up, and he's talking and I give him a look that says, hey, you be quiet now. I need him to just accept that and just be quiet, right? And you can kind of go all sorts of different things where that comes in. So balancing that is difficult. So naturally I go to the place of what's the math behind it? What's the value of compliance? What's the value of questioning? I think the value of questioning is pretty clear. I've talked about that in most of my videos. The value of compliance is an interesting one because I do think with compliance, if you think about the why behind why you're asking for compliance on certain issues, in theory, it's because you think you know better, right? You've been on the earth as a parent for 30, 40, whatever it is, 20, however many years, and you want to pass down some of that wisdom and have a more efficient process where he or she doesn't have to learn lessons the hard way. So you put certain hard and fast rules in place. And the assumption is that you've identified those social norms or those rules that must be followed, and therefore you're just going to put them in place for your child. But how do you know you're picking the right rules? How do you know you're picking the right things where compliance is demanded? How do you know it's not just subjective from your view? There's also a layer of, at least for me personally, identity issues that come into play. If I'm out somewhere and my son seems not to be compliant and it seems like I don't have quote unquote control over him and he's acting out or seems bratty or whatever it is, isn't just doing what I ask him to do, well, I worry others look at that and say, well, that's a bad parent. He can't control his kid. And again, that conflict comes back because part of me says, oh man, I don't want to be a bad parent. I don't want my kid to be viewed that way. I need to assert authority here. But there's another part of me that's like, yeah, no, I can't control my kid. I don't want to control him. I want to teach him to make good decisions. And again, so I'll kind of keep volleying back and forth here on both sides. I could hear the other side saying like, no. As a parent, you need control. You need discipline. You need compliance in certain areas. These children aren't, depending on what age, my son's in 2nd grade, they're not of an age or mentally developed enough in which they can figure those things out for themselves. You put them at risk, whether it be literal risk, physical danger, or risk mentally, socially, emotionally. They need some guardrails. They just don't know any better. You need to protect them from themselves. And again, I get the practicalness of that. I get there is some logic in that. But I just think it's such a gray area and it's such a delicate issue because, again, it's subjective where you pick that where they need the help, right? It assumes that you know exactly where that help is needed. Whereas, I'm going to be 37 years old. I still need help. I don't have all this figured out. So it's a little bit arrogant and self-indulgent of me to assume I know exactly what my kid needs to do and where they need to be compliant. So there's certainly a little bit of that, but there's also a fear of the conditioning that happens. Even if well-intentioned, as you add those rules in, as you demand compliance in different situations, and it's not always just parenting, right? At school, there's compliance that's required. There's all sorts of compliance. You're conditioning the mind to say, okay, there's certain things I just don't question. There's certain things I just do. And that's not something I want to be conditioned. So as with most things, it comes back to a balance that needs to be struck between those two things. And I think for me, the part I'm at in this process is just accepting the fact that there is a truth, an inconvenient truth, perhaps as I would say it, that there are things in which I demand compliance from my son. And I need to kind of explore that a little bit more and make sure that I'm okay with it. Really check the math on it and see if that's what I want it to be, or if it's at odds. And try and do it in a genuine way where I'm not letting identity issues and peer pressure or pressure from, family members or others who think, no, you have to raise your kid this way. But I also have to be careful to do right by my son. I can't just think that my approach is the right approach. As a 7-year-old, it's okay to give him the freedom to question and not need to be compliant. If he doesn't understand why he's doing it, then he shouldn't do it. There's risk in that. I don't know for certain that that's the right way, and I could be hurting my son in some way. So, I'm trying to work through that math a little bit, but I find that dichotomy interesting and maybe one of the most difficult ones as a parent to manage and balance.